us about the decisions that we make. As far as buildings go, and this is what we're focusing on today, they actually are about 40% of the total global emissions that cause greenhouse gases to form, which actually creates kind of a reflective barrier that lets the sun's heat in, but doesn't let it come out as fast as it goes in. Thereby we have this phenomenon of warming the globe. Buildings operations, like the energy that we use to operate the buildings for lighting, heating, things like that, occupies about 30%. And then the energy that goes into building, everything from the man hours, the equipment, the manufacture of materials, that occupies about 11% of constructing a building. Now, I know this is kind of a complicated chart, so I'll try to simplify it, but this is actually showing our probability of staying below an increase in global warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius, which at that point, we actually are going to experience some pretty detrimental climate change, melting of the polar ice caps, the kind of things that we're starting to see a little bit of evidence for, but this is going to be unchangeable changes. So if we actually will reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 65% there on the left, you'll see that by 2030, then that's going to keep us on track by 2040 to get down to the 100% CO2, 0% CO2 emission level. Governor Polis actually has 100% renewable energy goal by 2040. So, I think Colorado is well ahead of the curve in terms of what we're shooting for. I hope that we can stay on track and actually meet that goal. It's pretty aggressive, but I think we're going to have to be aggressive to stay ahead of climate change. So the potential we have with these buildings, it's pretty good. They're not really energy hogs, they're just inefficient. A lot of times they didn't operate with central heat and high-tech windows or insulated roofs and things that we have today. So, pretty easily, if we do kind of an overall energy retrofit of a building, we can save between 30 and 60%. And that's quite a bit for your bottom line on your cash savings. And what that really boils down to, and I get this $1 per square foot per year savings from this study, and that's really just a very broad average of smaller commercial buildings. And they actually list smaller commercial buildings much larger than our typical 5,000 square foot building. But I still think so. So I think the $1.09 is probably a good number. But in a small market where we actually have lower rents in our rural communities, that dollar makes a bigger difference per year in our rent. Compared to like Denver. So I think it's important to note that energy efficiency improvements make a bigger impact in smaller rural markets. Of course, it is harder to realize these savings. Mom and pop business, they're putting their heart and soul into the running of the business, and there's not a lot of extra time and sometimes not a lot of extra money to accomplish upgrading the building and making it more efficient. So we came up with an approach about a year ago where we wanted to focus on how we could bridge the gap between conserving and preserving our Main Street buildings, but also meeting the governor's goal of shooting towards that 100% renewable power by 2040. So to get to 100% renewable power, we actually have to lower our energy demand. And then, of course, we have to build more renewable infrastructure. So to reduce our demand is what we're really going to be focusing on today. I mean, solar is always a component with our buildings, but we're going to kind of take a step towards efficiency. And what we hope is that this will actually help property owners in a meaningful way to kind of understand how to stack incentives. And that's really what the program was about, is putting good incentives in front of property owners. The rural market is, of course, like I mentioned, harder to reach. Most of the time, energy efficiency incentives go to large commercial entities like manufacturing plants and things like that. Xcel gets money from all of us, and your utility does as well, if it's not Xcel, to fund what's called a ratepayer funded project. And that's something that they have to do, and usually they deal with energy efficiency. So that's where you get a rebate for a more efficient hot water tank and things like that. You pay for that. You pay a percentage out of your bill every month for those programs. So, I think we should capitalize on those. But usually they like to give the money to bigger commercial projects instead of smaller, because it's just a lot easier for them to give the money away faster. So they don't really make it available to smaller property owners. They don't really pitch their incentives as much in rural markets. And so that's kind of what we're hoping to do, is to make some of these, you aware of some of these things today. So with our approach, we need to actually first focus on historic preservation, because that really will help us work out the maximum synergy for effective incentive gathering. And it's not super difficult. Now, not every single building on Main Street is going to qualify for historic preservation incentives. That's, we need to understand that from step one. A building has to have good bones and good historic integrity. It can't have been completely modified. So the opportunity is really not there for everyone, but I think that most of our Main Street buildings, even if they've been modified, may be able to be restored or rehabilitated so that you could access some state and federal funding. We do have to follow some rules or some standards, some national and state standards to receive those funds, though. And just real quick, I want to talk about the group that we put together for Heritage Energy. We have bridged the gap between the Energy Office here in Colorado and the State Preservation Office, or History Colorado, and then DOLA, the agency that Main Street is in. And we've, this triad of agencies is working together. We meet monthly. We are collaborating on 3 projects right now across the state, and I'll share more on those. And we're trying to really launch this approach. New services that we offer, and things particularly in the design realm that I help with, is that we're doing kind of a walkthrough audit for Main Street property owners, so they don't have to necessarily pay for an audit from their utility provider or a private company. It's really just a very high level audit, but we can find some of the low hanging fruit, and that really pays off. Looking at the ages of equipment, seeing leaky windows and doors, discussing how to seal things up, talking about insulation. And then we help you plan a project, like walking through these incentives like we're going to do today, and putting them together in a meaningful way that works the best for your project. Of course, we do offer preservation guidance, which is something we've done for a long time. And then finally, we're going to be working with the Energy Office, their engineers, with their energy performance contracting crew, which is an incentive that we'll talk about, to do some ROI analysis, like how many inches of insulation on our roof is the optimal amount to get the best bang for the buck. So starting kind of back where things have been with preservation, there is a lot of high-level leadership for sustainability in it for historic preservation. I mean, these documents were done by the National Park Service, which is essentially who holds the, they're the keeper of the record for the National Register. And so they're really the ones that call the shots. And, something to note, if you're keeping notes, is that you should Google NPS preservation briefs. There's 50 of these. They're incredibly interesting because they talk about how to renew and restore specific components of buildings. Number 3 here is specifically on improving energy efficiency of historic buildings. They're short reads. They're very informative. They give you lots of good advice. The neat thing about these old buildings is that they already are very sustainable. I mean, they were built with durable materials that have lasted for a long time, and they can last just as long again. They can have another 100-year lifespan, and even more potentially if we just take care of them. And that's what's special about them too. Not only that they remind us of the past, but they're part of the future. They have things that operated without mechanical systems. So we used to use our windows for ventilation. We used to be able to remodel a storefront, which is really all you're really ever supposed to touch, or back in the day, they were designed with the intent of being able to easily design the part in the bottom of, like, say, a 2-story building, so that you could have a new business in there and have a new display window system and things like that. So they're flexible. We can still change those today to a certain extent. It kind of depends on the standards that I'll mention again in a second. Going along with some of these inherent sustainable elements, we share walls, so we don't have as much heat loss during like your house. It stands freely, and there's 4 walls that are exposed. But a Main Street building, most of them are sandwiched between 2 other buildings. So you've automatically created kind of this insulation capacity that most buildings don't have. And I think it's really a highlight for how we can save energy on Main Street, is the fact that we have this opportunity to really don't have to worry about insulating on two sides, and we can focus on just a roof and the front wall and the back wall. And that makes things a little bit easier to dissect, understand, and then do something about. Your high windows that sometimes were covered up, and I'm sure you have Main Street buildings in your town that the top windows that were originally there have been boarded up, or the storefronts maybe been remodeled insensitively to obscure these, or maybe there's a dropped ceiling inside where they don't really function anymore. So what we can help you do is we can help come up with a plan, a design for the facade that will restore the function of these. Because they do allow better daylighting. I mean, this is how we didn't have LED lighting, in 1900, and natural light is actually, a very nice effect that we get in our Main Street buildings that we don't have in a lot of modern storefronts. The recessed entries, they were for a couple of reasons. Mainly, they were just to provide a little shelter to step out of the weather, but it also gave you more display space as well. As you walked into a storefront, you had display windows on either side. So those are pretty neat. And then awnings. Often back in the day, you would have awnings that were operable. So during the summer, like say you're facing south, you might want to put the awnings out to shade your windows from too much heat. But in the winter, man, you could crank those awnings back and really benefit from that heat that would be coming in through the glass. Similarly, we had high ceilings in these, in the first floors of these buildings. And we could actually utilize ceiling fans. And it's funny, the old ones, I don't have a picture of it, but they were belt-driven ceiling fans. And they actually worked very well. You could turn them, run them in reverse to push down the heat that filters up to the ceiling in the wintertime and circulate the air. Something we don't really take advantage of too much anymore because we rely so much on our forced heat systems. And it's a little bit unfortunate. They used radiators a lot of times, or stoves. And then your double hung windows, the top part of the window is supposed to go down too, if it operates correctly, so that you can create a high and low differential in airflow through a space, or from the front to the back of a building usually. So when we start looking at these things, with our modern equipment, we can of course assess a building through an energy audit, and there's different levels of those. You can actually go through kind of a walkthrough audit like we provide with Main Street, where we can actually go through and give advice based on the existing conditions, or we can start to take things to the level of mechanical engineering, where we actually go in and, like the blower door on the right picture, the red door, that pressurizes a building so that they can easily find leaks around windows and through cracks in the walls and things. They use a smoke stick. It's not smoke, but it's a kind of a chemical. It looks like smoke, and it'll draw towards leaky spots in the walls and windows. And they use that to see how fast it's moving. And then they use thermal imaging sometimes also to see the transfer of heat from the outside. We had an audit done on our house, and they actually showed some thermal imaging of like the attic hatch that goes up to the attic, and it was like glowing red, because there was no insulation on it. So since then, we put some rigid foam board insulation on there, and I'm sure it's much better than it was. So we're saving energy. So it's, there's a real reason to get these audits and get those reports. And a lot of times your utility provider will subsidize the cost of a really good audit, where you have like an engineer or a building inspector type person that comes in that's been trained in doing audits. So they are worth it. Other things that we can do that are just really low hanging fruit is we can seal up around our doors and windows. These older wood windows have a lot of times just been not maintained. And so the old mohair weather stripping is probably faded or deteriorated, or it's gone. And so we can seal those back up. As an example, we can put a door sweep at the bottom of our door instead of having a 3/4 inch gap of air that's just flowing in from the front main door. We can add attic insulation or rooftop insulation. We can install what's interior storm windows. And I wish I had a picture of this, but on the inside of a traditional wood window, you can actually put another pane of either plexiglass or glass, and it's mounted in little clips that magnet on, or that fit with friction with neoprene around the edges of this glass. into the casement of the other window, and it creates a large airspace between the original exterior window and this new interior storm window. And so you've got like 3 inches of airspace, which air is the best insulator that we have. Um, and that will give you a much higher R value than any kind of double pane window that you can get today. So there are ways to actually keep the original windows and really exceed what's available in the market for really an inferior product. So going back to the Heritage Energy approach, we had a competitive application process back in 2021, early in the year, and we put a call out to all of our Main Street towns, and we had around 20 applications come in to participate in a pilot project where we were going to essentially connect property owners with incentive financing to upgrade their buildings, both for their historic preservation and their exterior appearance. Number one, to drive more business, to beautify the downtown, to get more customers in the door, which all those things have been shown to be true when you upgrade a facade, and then also to do energy efficiency work. The projects are in Leadville, Ridgeway, and Trinidad, and I'll just run through what they are now and where they're at. The bank building was actually in the movie True Grit with John Wayne. It was the mortuary, or the undertaker's office. The storefront on the right there that is actually highlighted was actually where that was. And you can see on the left that the transom windows had been covered up, and they actually had been removed, and this wood paneling had been put up, and there was no insulation or anything. Now, we don't know why this happened, but it did. They did have some good original windows underneath. Through reconfiguration and reconstruction of the original windows, making them double pane storefront glass, and then doing some double pane transom windows that were new, but actually were made to match the original. This building is also, it's not only more beautiful and more like it was originally, and they do have to add paint still. This is still in process, but actually it'll save energy too. A second project that we're working on is the historic Fox West Theater in Trinidad. You've probably seen this if you've driven downtown and come into the entryway of downtown. The idea on this project is to really focus on preservation, in that we're restoring the entire front facade of the building and reactivating the 2 commercial spaces that were originally existing. There have been several remodels that have happened. There was a 1934 marquee that was put on the building that was actually found to not meet the period of significance for the building. So the central archway will be restored with the columns. And then also the 1960s brickwork that was done that actually removed one of the storefront entries will be replaced with historic wood storefront elements and transom glazing. This will actually include rooftop insulation over this front storefront area, as well as double pane glass on these storefronts. And then another project in Leadville also took a preservation first approach and is working to actively completely restore their facade. And this one's interesting in that the brickwork on the front had been painted green, as you can see in the top left picture. The paint could not be removed without damaging the exterior varnish of the brick, the finish of the brick, which would cause it to deteriorate over the years just due to freezing and thawing and water sticking on the surface and weathering. So what they did was they literally took every brick off, because the brick walls are about 3 or 4 courses of brick thick. So they're able to remove the exterior layer of brick and then reconstruct it by turning the brick 180 degrees and then rebuilding the wall. And what we see now is what the brick would have originally looked like in this picture to the right when it was constructed. Right now, they're actually doing some mock-ups on paint, back to the original paint scheme for that cornice and storefronts. So these will be projects you'll be able to see finished around July 1st. So let's dip into preservation incentives. First of all, I mentioned some standards. If you guys don't know about them, there are 10 standards, and that's it. It's kind of a philosophy because they're a little bit organic, or they flow between each other. and they're based on interpretation of preservationists, like in the State Preservation Office and the National Park Service. But in any case, Google Secretary of the Interior Standards for Rehabilitation, and you'll see those 10 standards. They're easy to understand. It's like restore rather than replace. Use lightest means necessary. So you wouldn't just come in and knock things out. You would actually keep things, even if they look a little rusty and crusty sometimes, and we'd refinish those just to show their age. I think that's important in preservation work. The first incentive that I wanted to talk about was the State Historical Fund. This was established back in 1990, I believe. And there are 3 towns where Cripple Creek, Black Hawk, and Central City, which is a Main Street town, that the gaming revenue that would come from the 3 gaming towns would actually, there'd be a small percentage set aside for preservation. And generally there's about $8 million a year that flows into that fund that they give out for preservation projects that are essentially in the public good, where there's a high public value. You know, a building facade could be that. Restoring an important town-owned building could be that. You know, a place of great importance could be that. You know, they even go into things like oral histories and preserving landscapes and archaeology. But the 2 grants I wanted to talk about and highlight are the planning grant and just their general grants. The planning grant is fantastic in that you can actually take your building that you've just purchased, or that you know someone that has just attained a building, and you can have a historic structure assessment done for the property. And that's a really deep dive into the history of the building, and also like a structural assessment of the elements that make up the building. You know, is the roof framing strong enough? You know, are there problems with mold? You know, and the folks that do these, not only are they expert historians, but they are very good at giving you kind of a to-do list for your building. You know, these planning grants can cover your architect and your engineering expenses as well. Essentially anything you need to plan for a project to get it ready to construct or to remodel. And then that's where you lead into these mini or general grants. And the mini grants start or top out at about $50,000, which is great. And the general grant can go up to $250,000. And these are generally available once per year each. The matches range, because there is a match, you have to bring money to get money in this case. For a not-for-profit or public entity, the match is only 25%. And for a privately owned property, it's 50%. And so that's kind of how it works. You know, you can use this money to buy a property that needs to be saved. You can use it for general property upgrades and all kinds of things. So, you know, if you're interested in these kinds of grants, Google State Historical Fund and go to their grants. You could actually Google State Historical Fund grant types, and it'll pop right up. The next thing that we have in Colorado, which I will say is the best in the country, is our historic preservation tax credit at 35%. And a QRE is a qualified rehabilitation expense. There are certain things, and there's a list of things that will qualify. It's basically anything that's screwed down, nailed down, permanently affixed to a building, or part of a system that's integrated into the building's function. You know, then the federal tax credit, you know, is only for 20%. Now, to get these, you have to have a property designated. For the state historic tax credit, and also for the State Historical Fund, the property can be locally designated if you have a Historic Preservation Commission, or it can be designated through the State Historic Register. For the federal tax credit, you essentially have to get the property up to the level of significance to be listed on the National Register of Historic Places. So to attain these credits, you have to reach certain thresholds in the preservation, and of course you have to follow the Secretary of the Interior standards. So jumping over to energy incentives now, and I'm going to talk more about how you leverage these the preservation incentives with energy incentives as kind of a combined strategy here at the end. There are quite a few energy incentives that we need to get through though. So the first one is called energy performance contracting. And this is something that the Colorado Energy Office hosts. This is where their engineers reside. This is a really neat program that was enabled by statute to essentially set up financing and contracting all at once for public entities to complete energy improvements that will actually fund through the savings that the energy improvements garner will fund the project. So, it's for any public entity. It's for higher education institutes, counties, school districts, special districts. And essentially what has to happen here is that you have to identify a savings potential. How much, so they'll do an energy audit, and they often do what's called an investment grade energy audit, which really gets down to the brass tacks. And they do calculations and things like that. They size the equipment appropriately for like how things will operate after you've, say, put in a programmable thermostat, insulated your roof, sealed up all the gaps, really just everything you can do. Then they'll actually apply like the smallest systems that are necessary to run the building effectively. So, saving money all around. So once you've identified the potential savings, then you actually do the calculations. They help you do the calculations to show, how much you're going to receive on a yearly or monthly basis back in utility savings. Now, how this works is, the town has a certain amount of operating income that they get, that they're currently utilizing. It's taxpayer money. As this goes forward, they are going to use the same amount of money, but they're basically going to get these improvements for free. And then after a certain number of years, they're going to be operating at a lower level. Once the improvements have paid themselves off, then you actually are operating at a lesser level. And the reason this is all legal with Tabor is because we're not actually appropriating more money to do these improvements. And that's what's so special for public entities with EPC. Here's another example. You can use energy performance contracting for renewable energy as well. So let's just say some things like solar or a geothermal heating system. Those can be actually financed as well. Just that you're going to be saving money off the top. The cost of that has to pay for itself within a certain period of time for the life of the equipment. You're also lowering the load on the building, so you're not drawing as much electricity. So thereby, there's no trigger for Tabor. So these things have to pencil out. And that's, again, what's so special about EPC is that it's a guaranteed savings. Like the engineers are serious about this and they make sure it works. So I kind of gone through this, but things are cost weighted on the average life of the equipment, which is important if you go after DOLA grants to actually implement the match that's required, or the cost that's required to do the financing in this case for these improvements. So let's just say that DOLA will only fund things that have a 15-year payback. But let's say we had to do windows and they have a 25-year payback. If we can show that the savings that we're going to get from the increased performance of the windows will cover that other 10 years, then DOLA will still allow you to get a grant to cover 15 years. And so they work hand in hand. It's something that hasn't been utilized to a terrible degree. I don't see every energy impact project come through, but they have been focusing more in our agency on clean and renewable energy projects. So this would be something to talk with your local regional manager with DOLA if you're interested in financing public improvements using the EPC program, and they'll get you connected to those engineers over at the Energy Office. So I think the most important tool that we have today for energy efficiency upgrades is a loan program called Colorado Clean Energy Fund. It actually just kicked off this last year. It's one of 19 green banks across the country. It's the first green bank in Colorado. It's a not-for-profit, and it's a revolving loan fund. And what this allows is us to take out smaller amounts of money for our, and this is for private entities. This is not for public. It allows us to take out smaller loans that we would need to do, say, an overall energy upgrade and new systems and everything, or maybe even just a new roof with some solar panels. The projects generally work the same way as EPC, in that there are engineers that will come on board at the beginning to make sure things pencil, or to show you where that line in the sand is. Is our increased cost that we're going to incur every month to pay back the loan going to be covered by the energy savings, or is it not? And if it's not, are you going to be able to recoup the cost of the equipment before its lifetime is breached? Those kinds of things are important decisions to make. And so they'll help you with that. The loan term is a 15-year loan if you decide to take on a loan. It will finance 100% of the project, which is very important. So you don't have to really come to the table with anything, which is incredible for a property owner downtown, especially if we can get something that pencils, right? So, and also there are very low fees. So, with a traditional home mortgage and things like that, you have like a high annual percentage rate when you have high fees. Well, in this case, things just really work to your benefit. You don't have as many fees up front, so the long-term repayment is much less. And typically these are 4 to 5% loans, probably on the higher side for smaller projects. So what's eligible? Generally, with these privately funded energy loans and incentives, this is kind of the high level list. You can do lighting, you can do solar, beneficial electrification, which means things like an electric water heater instead of a gas water heater, with the to presuppose that you're going to actually do some renewable energy in the future. And getting away from fossil fuels is part of that. Lower flow plumbing fixtures qualify. Essentially anything that saves you money on your utility bill, you can finance through a green bank. All right, so not to get everybody eyes crossed here, but this slide, I just was trying to do some, napkin type calculations, and it's very rough, but I just want to walk you through it. So let's say you take out a CCEF loan, and that's Colorado Clean Energy Fund. They've got a little website for $50,000. Let's say we're going to do our roof and add some solar panels. Our yearly out of pocket on that loan is about $400 a month, or $4,740 a year. Then let's say that we actually go after the Colorado tax credit, and that's going to pay back when we're completed with the project. It can pay back 35%, which would be $17,500 off our $50,000 that we can receive back. And we can actually sell the Colorado tax credits for like 90 cents on the dollar typically. So, a large portion of this can either come back into your pocket at the end of the project, or you can actually just not pay state taxes for a long time. And then the federal income tax credit for 20% would be about $10,000. I'm showing kind of like the expense here if you did sell your Colorado tax credits at $1,750. It's an estimate. And then if you don't want to do any of that paperwork, which I would, unless you're have a lot of time on your hands, I would say to pay a tax credit consultant, the $4,000 to help you walk through the project. And this is just, again, it's just estimates based on some previous conversations I've had with folks. So then boiling this all down, let's just say you have a very good building that has potential to be listed on the National Register, and you've kind of received guidance from the State Historic Preservation Office that they believe it can be, and they're going to help you work on your federal tax credit. And so if you're listed on the National Register, just by proxy, you're listed on the state register. It just works that way in Colorado. So let's on the box to the right in the bottom, the yellow box, let's say that you're going to end up with this $27,500 worth of credits, right, from the federal and the state tax credits. That essentially means that you're going to only owe $29,250 of the $50,000. the beauty of the CCEF loan is that they will allow you, I believe, one time to change your loan terms. And so instead of continuing to pay, the same monthly payment of, what was it, $395 a month over 15 years, you could re-amortize or reschedule your loan and only end up paying a much less. You could, if you got just the state tax credit, you're looking at, well, excuse me, with the state tax credit, you're looking at $231 a month. The federal tax credit's a little different. You essentially should probably utilize that one for your federal income tax, because there's some special legal considerations, and you have to hold them for at least 5 years. But I'm essentially showing that you're saving the same money. You're just taking it off your federal income tax. Okay, so at the that gets you down from the $4,740 a year down to $2,109 per year. It's only $176 a month to get a new roof and new solar panels. And this doesn't even factor in how much money you're going to save in your energy cost. And it's also not factoring in any grants that you may receive. So it could be very easy to be cash positive in the situation. And that's really what we're wanting to show folks, is that there's ways that you can actually go after these improvements and not end up being in the red. And again, I think it's just most important that you realize that you can reschedule your CCEF loans after you receive those state tax credits and you've syndicated or sold those on the private market to somebody who needs those for their big business or whatever. You end up being able to pay much less per month. So I want to talk a little bit about Colorado CPACE too. Before we had the Colorado Clean Energy Fund, or CCEF, we had something called CPACE. CPACE works very similar to the Clean Energy Fund. As a matter of fact, the Energy Fund was actually kind of modeled off of CPACE. The Energy Fund, though, focuses more on smaller projects, but CPACE focuses more on larger projects where you're looking at $100,000 plus. There are higher upfront fees. There's a reason for this. So essentially what happens with CPACE is that you can borrow 100% financing. You can cover your architect, your engineer, and all your construction fees and all your expenses for materials and so on. They will give you a longer loan term. So instead of the 15-year loan term, they give you up to 25 years. But the way the repayment works is different. So where CCEF is tied to you as an individual as a private loan, this one is tied to the property and is repaid through a special assessment on your property taxes whenever you pay those. If you pay them twice a year, there will be a separate assessment that is permanently tied to the property that will include an additional amount of money to repay the CPACE loan. And again, you're hoping that with CPACE, things will pencil out, that your energy savings will be greater than the cost to finance that money. But why would you do this, right? If you've got higher fees, if it's going to cost me more to take the loan, if I have to spend a whole bunch of money and I don't really need 100,000 or more, which 100,000 is kind of a small CPACE project from what I understand. And these go through private lenders, just like where CCEF is a green bank that actually funds it themselves. They've received monies and things from capital providers and from the state actually for seed money to actually fund their renewable fund. This one comes from private lenders. And you would use this in a certain situation. Say you have a large, say an old school that's a pretty big building. I'm thinking of let's just say there's, it's a 30,000 square foot building. You're going to convert it to housing. It's going to take you $1 million to do it, and then also you're not really planning to stay in it for the long haul. You're kind of thinking, I don't know if I want to borrow this money and have to have it, I don't want to necessarily have to personally repay the loan whenever I go to sell the property in a few years to another investment group or whatever. This would be when you want to use CPACE because it's tied to the property. So in a way, it doesn't necessarily shelter an investor or a developer, but it's just a different structure of ownership of that equipment and things like that that permanently ties it to the building. I can talk to you guys more about the differences in these if you care to know any more. So finally, I want to talk about the USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture. It is a program, they have some programs that are kind of compelling that we've, last year we had another energy webinar. We actually had the Colorado and New Mexico folks on the line telling us about their programs. I'm going to kind of just rebrief you on that. There are a couple things that they will give you grants and loans for that I think are applicable to Main Street. So there's renewable energy systems like solar, geothermal, things like that. And then there's energy efficiency improvements. So the REAP, REAP is Rural Energy for America program. And it is you're gonna need to borrow money through something like CCEF, but you also you want to get a grant, and you want to cover up to 25% of the project cost of that loan. Wouldn't that be nice? You know, so in the end, let's say that you're getting the state tax credits and you're going to borrow that. I forget where we were at, but it wasn't 50,000. It was like half of that almost. Let's say that you want to fund a quarter of that or a quarter of the whole amount. This is a good way to bring your bottom line up even better. So you can actually finance up to $500,000, which would be a huge project, but your minimum is $2,500. So it's potentially worthwhile to go through and jump through the hoops of this federal program to capitalize on this renewable energy system if you're going to do solar or geothermal, which both have high paybacks. Energy efficiency grants. This would be something like adding roof insulation to protect that new geothermal heat so you don't lose it as fast, and it's even more efficient. To do better windows that will let heat in at the right time of year so that you can keep the heat in the year when you want it and not when you don't. Double pane low E windows, for example. So that one falls down to $1,500 minimum on the grant side. And then they offer something called a guaranteed loan. I'll be honest, I don't have experience working with the USDA, so any of these things, these products we're talking about, if you have any interest, I would love to partner with you to work through one of these and just figure out what's involved, and we can talk to those representatives. I have those connections, and but I would like to come alongside you if you have any interest in this projects. But a guaranteed loan is essential. They'll fund up to the other 25%. So they'll give you a grant for 25% potentially, right? And then they'll fund up to 75% of a project's cost. So again, you can be net zero out of pocket. I do think there will be some hoops to go through with this kind of money. They do have a grant cycle that only opens up once per year. And there's a $5,000 loan minimum when you do a guaranteed loan. They do have a low fee like CCEF of only 1%. And then every year there's a 0.25% of your loan amount operating fee. And here's the kinds of projects that you can find, these renewable energy projects. Unless you own an old mill, I don't think you're going to use small hydroelectric, but it's one that may be applicable. And then energy efficiency, of course, almost everything on the list you could capitalize on. The last thing that the USDA offers that I'm also interested in partnering with maybe a town in this case on would be they can go after grants. A public entity can go after a grant to pay for energy audits for multiple people in the downtown. So they can get up to $100,000 a year to fund energy audits, which could be really helpful for property owners downtown. And I would love to see this happen. And then finally, and maybe most importantly, is this database that I'd like you to write down. It's DESIRE, or Database of State Incentives for Renewables and Efficiency. And it's going to cover a lot of other ones, including all the utility providers, all their incentives, for your particular providers, for example. And it is a database, so there may be some crusty information that may not be up to date, but it has so many more resources than what we've even covered now. For energy and renewable. So I definitely think you should get this email address, or this web address, and check it out. then finally, we kind of come to the end. And, you know, this quote from John Ruskin, who was an older architectural theologian, he said, when we build, let us build forever. You know, don't just build for today. Let it be work that, you know, our future generations will thank us for. And when we build, when things are done, let these things be sacred, like our Main Street buildings, because our hands have touched them. And then the next generations will say, look at what they did for us. And so I think we all have the opportunity to do that in our towns. We can preserve the resources we have, and we can make them even better with today's technology. So, you know, we want to help you and partner with you any way we can to do this kind of work, this heritage energy approach. And we're just really proud that we can offer this as a state. Not many states have this going or have these level of incentives that we do. So let us know how we can help, and I'll take any questions if you've got any.
Larry, while you're waiting for folks to come in with any questions, what a great job and what a powerhouse of a presentation here with lots of good tips, tricks, tools, and funding. Well done.
Thanks. You know, and I think in a lot of cases, it's going to boil down to who's ready to do the work. There will be some time commitment with these kinds of projects. That's why we're here too. We're here to kind of come alongside the property owner from really step one and figure out what their goals are for the project. I mean, do they want to be a net zero energy building, which we would love to see some of these in Main Street. At this point, you could be the first one in our Main Street program to do that work. There have been other properties that are not Main Street properties that have done that kind of work. It's very possible that we can actually pull this off and not pay any energy bills down the road, things like that.
So Larry, this is Jeannie Caldwell. The town has acquired, I think I talked to you about it at the Main Street Now conference. We have acquired a building on Main Street, which I think I've sent you a picture of before, but I can get another one, which we are trying to trace back the date when it was built. So we're doing some work on that. And this building was donated to the town. So I think this building would be a perfect fit for this program. Okay. So I think probably the first thing we need to do, we talked about having it surveyed, having them come in and look at it and assess it and stuff like that. So do I need to start and just trace the date back it was built for historic preservation purposes first, or what would be the first thing I would need to do for this building?
That's a good question. You know, like I mentioned before, there is a planning grant that, since it's town owned, I believe it's 10% is what the match is to get a historic structural assessment. And I think that would be a really good first thing that we could do.
So do I need to trace the date the building was built first, or?
That kind of information is on the application, certainly, okay. You know, to list as much as you know, but essentially that's what you just do as well as you can. You can't be expected to know everything about a property. That's what you're hiring someone to do, is to figure out all that and trace its history, as well as examine the building. So, you know, I would encourage you to, as a matter of fact, I'll just send you a link to that application, and we can just start from there.
Okay, that's perfect.
And Jeannie, since the town owns the building, our consulting funds may be able to help you out with some of that as well. Reach out to Gail to follow up on what the possibilities are there.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Tracy.
Yep.
Yeah, Tracy just took the words out of my mouth.
And Ted, I know you had your hand up. Please feel free to unmute yourself or type your question in chat. Maybe you answered his question, Larry.
Okay. Yeah, I know there was a lot of information there, and I don't want to overwhelm you guys. So like, that's why we're definitely available to follow up with. Love to have conversations around. This is really my passion, is putting preservation and conservation together as one thing.
Larry, I did have one other thought on a previous slide. I didn't want to interrupt your flow because you were on a roll. But people can go ahead and apply to have the building looked at to be listed while they, at the same time, if I'm right, they can apply for tax credits. Can you explain how that process works since it's lengthy?
Oh, the tax credit process is lengthy. I mean, you need to go ahead and allow yourself a year is what I would advise. And if you've had a historic structural assessment done, that's going to only help you. It's going to only help your case, because you're going to have all the information in hand that you need at that point to file for the tax credits. Now, of course, you have to be a private entity or not. You have to be someone that can either pays taxes so that you can get a credit for the taxes you pay, or you can actually structure something with I think in Colorado, if you lease a property, for however it would work for $1 a year for 39 years, to somebody that would be a tenant of the property, then they can claim the tax credit. So like, say, a publicly owned building, you could kind of do that method. You'd work with the State Preservation Office. I mean, the first step would really just be to, express your interest to me or anybody on the team, and we'll get going with making sure that you have the right form in hand, and that we can actually even go through that before we talk to the State Preservation Office. They will be the ones that will come alongside you. I know sometimes that they, just like all of us, can get busy. So that's where I offer assistance, as well as making sure that we're ready to talk to them when we do have that conversation. We have some photos, we know what we're going to be doing first, and then we can go to them and say, help us finish this. And I don't know if we're going to make this presentation available to anyone, Tracy. I know there was a lot of stuff that we wrote down on the slides that maybe folks wanted to reread or needed the link or something.
Happy to send this out to everyone. And I also, I'm sure you noticed, started recording a little bit late because I know a couple of people had reached out to me and said that they couldn't make it this morning. So yes, we're happy to make this available to everyone, of course. We'll put it online as well. And if there aren't any more questions, I think, again, just thank you everyone for joining us this morning. Reach out with any questions, particularly today to Larry. He's the one who knows this stuff. And be sure to, again, just keep an eye out on our emails to register and join us in the future for future webinars, and have a wonderful Memorial Day weekend.
Yeah.
Thank
Bye,
you,
everyone.
everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Thank you.